Mr. Perkins, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I gave notice several days ago of a motion for another study, and that given that a former federal public servant at Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, otherwise known as ISED, pled guilty to criminal breach of trust for directing 72 sole source contracts worth $231,663 to a company he owned. The committee hold 2 meetings on this topic and invite the Minister, RCMP, and ISED officials to better understand this fraudulent billing scheme that took place under the Liberal government. So, as you may be aware, I'm sure you are, that this former public servant funneled taxpayer money to companies he owned through clearly a procurement process that is faulty at ISED. I actually think it's an indication that we don't know, as MP Rempel Garner said earlier, what is happening to the spending controls at this department. This is just perhaps the bare surface of the iceberg. We've seen the big iceberg of the Green Slush Fund and the $1 billion Liberal Green Slush Fund, which his Auditor General indicated had $390 million that were either conflicted or misappropriately spent by Liberal-appointed board directors. Now we have the department that was meant to oversee that not even able to manage the basic procurement processes and ensuring that it wasn't being abused by their own employees. So according to the RCMP and the internal accounting records keeping practices, that's sort of what led to it, but what didn't lead to it was stopping it in the first place when they had a procurement process in place in the department that allowed this kind of abuse. So I think this is an urgent matter. This department is one of the biggest spending departments in the government, and it has many, many programs, some of which have very loose, I would put it that way, terms, like the Strategic Innovation Fund, SIF, which is sort of a nondescript multi-billion-dollar fund that's used to fund anything the government wants. It doesn't really have any parameters other than, hey, let's reach in and pull out a ton more money out of this for this government priority. It seems to be a mystery out there other than they have rounds of funding and any company can apply, and there doesn't seem to be any consistent terms or records. So there appears to be very lax standards by the CFO of ISED, by the now former deputy minister of ISED, because they've changed the deputy minister. I'm sure it had nothing to do with SDTC. And taking the fall for inadequacies of the minister that's been in place for 40 months and can't seem to get his hands on understanding where the money is going that his department is responsible for. So it's incumbent upon us as a committee, as a parliamentary body, to provide that scrutiny on the expenditure of these critical tax dollars at a time where the government is running up a $50 billion deficit, says they can't find any savings. Maybe they should find savings by actually having proper accounting standards within their own departments. And a couple of meetings on this right now, I think, are timely, given that the department is, I'm sure, intent over the next few months for some reason as we head into 2025 and with a shaky parliament, might be spending a little more money for some reason. We need to make sure it's not being spent in ways that either particular individuals within the public service or that the Liberals have appointed to things are going to abuse. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Monsieur Perkins. Monsieur Patzer.
There we go. Yeah, it's quite remarkable when you look at timelines. We look at the more recent scandals that have come through SDTC in the hundreds of millions of dollars. You go back to this one here. I mean, the criminal conduct that we're looking at here was between 2016 and 2018. And so this was obviously in the earlier days of the current government's administration. And you just look at the way things have progressed. This was a source of contracts was about $230,000, something like that. To me, that's a lot of money. To the taxpayers, that's a lot of money. And then you look at how grand the scandals and the grifting have become when you start looking at the hundreds of millions of dollars that are being misappropriated through SDTC. It's absolutely remarkable just how brazen the insiders and well-connected folks to the Liberal government have become. And I think studying this one would be very important because I think it'll give us a good snapshot just kind of how this has all gotten out of hand so fast, so quickly, because this was early in this government's administration. And I think it's going to show us just exactly the way that the snowball has really gained momentum, it's gained size, and when you look at just how many different ways the taxpayer is being fleeced these days, I think this is a good way to show how that started and how that's begun, and just how that overall sense of entitlement, I would say, seems to be permeating all throughout the public service with Liberal insiders. So, yeah, I think that this is another urgent matter. And we've heard today there's all sorts of urgent matters, and I mean, just because there is no end to it with this government. So, I would implore colleagues to take a serious consideration of this one, and I think we should get onto this one as quickly as we can, because as we've heard, we're at a bit of an impasse here now with C-27, with the Liberals filibustering for several meetings on the current provision that we are at on the meeting. So, yeah, it's helpful that for once somebody has been criminally charged, and he actually pled guilty, which is good. But I think we still got to figure out how this happened, why there was no accountability within the ministry, and there's a lot of angles that we can take on this to try to figure out how this is happening and being allowed to happen, because it still continues to happen in greater amounts to this day. So, yeah, I look forward to us hopefully getting onto this study and making sure that taxpayers know that we take seriously the stewardship of the money that the government takes from them.
Thank you. I have Monsieur Garon and ensuite Monsieur Turnbull.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I thank my colleague, Mr. Perkins, for having tabled this motion. In fact, these are always troubling facts when the management of public funds is done in this way. And I'll take advantage to remind of this too. We had C-250-36 rather, that which was unanimously passed, that will deal with these kinds of acts. It's now at the Senate, and I hope everyone will support it there, in order that we can minimize these kinds of acts and that we won't have to always be discussing them in committee. Now, having said that, Mr. Chairman, I'm not a lawyer, thank God, but I have the impression, and perhaps you are the authority here. Yeah, I did want to make you chuckle, but secondly, I wanted to get an answer. When you plead guilty, there's a judgment that's handed down, and I trust that the courts will give us the answers we seek in that regard. But there is part of the motion that I do agree with, which deals with the minister being asked about it. We can ask him the questions. He's responsible for what happens within his department, and he has an obligation to accept that responsibility and explain to us what his perspective is on the issue. So I think that it's probably a good question for the meeting when the minister will be present, and I'm sure he'll be pleased to explain to us what's happened and what corrective measures have been taken, if any. So, and we can perhaps, he would perhaps reconsider if necessary. Thank you very much. Mr. Turnbull, And Mr. Aria?
Yield the floor to MP Turnbull. We have the option of going to 10:30 if we want, because we did start at 8:30. Sorry for that. But otherwise, we can also end at 10:15 because you might have prior commitments. So we'll end at 10:15. Then I see general agreement around the table. MP Turnbull.
Yeah, Mr. Garon has made some good points today, and in this particular case, I agree with him actually again. That these questions could be posed to the minister when the minister appears. But I also would like to say that Mr. Patzer had said, he was seeking accountability. I think in this particular case, the department caught through an internal accounting and record-keeping practices change. They caught this individual who was then dismissed from employment at February 2019. The matter was then referred to the RCMP for investigation. The RCMP investigated, laid charges on August 29th. And I believe the individual in question received a 24-month conditional sentence for the breach of trust charge. And PSPC has revoked and suspended the security status of the subcontractors and referred the cases to the RCMP, who is now investigating. And PSPC is also moving forward on recovering the illegitimate payments on behalf of the Government of Canada to protect taxpayers' money. And the individual pled guilty on September 5th. So there's been accountability, right? I mean, that is accountability. There's no organization in the country that can prevent any form of individuals trying to game the system. If an individual does that undetected for a long period of time, I could say, yeah, there isn't the right systems in place. But if this individual was detected, referred to the police, was let go from his position, was then charged by the RCMP, then pled guilty, and then funds have been recovered, I mean, to me, that's actually a case where we should be saying the system worked to find that person. Yes, we could certainly say, how could we prevent that from happening again? And I think that's a worthy question to talk with the minister about, and I think that's very fair. But in terms of saying that there was no accountability, I think that that's just blatantly false in this particular matter, because clearly there has been accountability. It's unfortunate that individuals like this individual, did what they did, and they've been held accountable for their actions. So, and as long as the funds have been recovered, I mean, I think I would be pretty satisfied as a taxpayer that those funds were recovered. So that's what I have to say. So I'm against the study, but not against obviously any individuals on the committee who obviously want to ask the minister when he comes questions about this. I think it's more than fair to do so. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Turnbull. J'ai Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Mr. Aria.
Mr. Garon's suggestion that this is something that we can ask the minister. When I first read about this case in the media, one thing I was not very happy was that it was just a slap on the wrist with no jail time. That was my first concern. Second question, first thought, and I had a question myself. Are the public service employees, I don't think there's any requirement for them to disclose the companies they own, the business they are in, like the parliamentarians we have to do with the ethics commissioner. I think if there's not, it's time for that to be instituted so that some of the straightforward cases like this can be nipped in the bud before it happens. So I agree with Mr. Garon that this is something that merits a question to the minister, but not a full study.
Merci, Monsieur Aria. J'ai Brian Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really sympathetic to this for a different reason in terms of what's been expressed at the moment. I would rather see the minister answer it first, but I'm hoping if it's not brought back, I'll bring it back, because I see this also through a different lens. This is outsourcing. So this is outsourcing that shouldn't have happened. We have a public service, and this is where I would like to start to get and dive on this a little bit deeper, is why all these contracts went single source. and why all these contracts can't go to the public service that we have and how we've gutted the public services capabilities and we hire outside the box of the public service so many times with least accountability. And that's, to me, is kind of more germane to this, because it sounds like we've captured some of what's taken place here. The minister can respond when the minister comes here.
Monsieur Massé, je pense qu'il n'y a pas de ça, Monsieur Garon. I'll see if translation is coming through. Just give us 1 second. It's back? Okay. Sorry about that.
No, thank you. Mr. Garon is probably saying that I speak in gibberish. So it's no, it's like no, it's very good. All good. So I'll be quick though to finish up. And so to me, it's about timing right now at the moment. So I would rather see the minister respond to this, but I'm actually, and I'd be interested with the mover later on to look at how we can expand this a little bit more. But my kind of where I want to chase this down is why we're outsourcing so much, why there's 72 sole source contracts. Like, how does that happen? Like, and how often is that happening? And then also, too, is that, like, what has been gutted in our system that we have to be so dependent upon contracts like that? So, to me, it's about that issue as much as about the particulars here. So, for those reasons, I'd like to see this put off till we get the minister to come here first and answer some questions. Now, to be fair to my colleague who's moved this, too, though, is that we're telling my colleague that he has to use time of his questioning on the minister on that. And so I also concede that is actually something we're putting a burden on my colleague on this motion. So that is with recognition of that and try to find a solution to that, because it is, I think, a fair motion to ask. But at the same time, it can be done when the minister's here. But at the same time, it is going to take a little bit out of his time while asking something here. But I still think that's the better of the options that were presented in front of us right now.
Thank you, MP Massé. I have MP Patzer.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of respond to the accountability piece here. Like I was saying, there were 72 instances here that were a breach. Now, I know that, yes, this guy paid the money back, which, yes, taxpayers will be happy about that, but taxpayers are not happy about the $330 million that's been misappropriated through the Green Slush Fund. They're not happy about the millions and millions of dollars that Christian Firth got through GC Strategies. They are not happy about the contracting practices that have gone through McKinsey. They're not happy with the Rive scam debacle that continues to be an ongoing issue. So when we talk about accountability, it's not just a one-off on one instance here, right? And this the fact that the accountability has happened on a very well, I mean, this is still a big scandal, but it's a small-scale scandal compared to the things that we're currently dealing with the way that this government has mishandled taxpayer money and allowed it to be funneled out. So it was the previous minister, Navdeep Bains, that was the minister at the time of this, who was also the minister when a lot of the misappropriation of the Green Slush Fund has happened. I mean, it would almost be worth inviting him back to committee again to have another go at him around this stuff, because but it still hasn't the air of entitlement, or the air of that money can just go be thrown about wherever or be taken by people, hasn't changed. There's been nothing done to ensure that this kind of fraud and behavior doesn't happen, that the breach of trust doesn't continue to happen. And that's the problem. That's where the lack of accountability lies. Yes, this individual, thankfully, was criminally charged and investigated by the RCMP. But there is a lot bigger, way bigger instances out there that I hope will be investigated and charged, much just like this fellow was. So the accountability doesn't stop with this guy. There's a lot more that needs to happen when we talk about accountability. And that's where I'm getting at here, is there is a whole entire string of events that have happened since this. This is just the beginning, and it's gotten bigger and more grand as time has gone on. So when you look at the hundreds of millions, probably into the billions of dollars that taxpayers have been bilked in the last 10 years by people because of this government, that's where the problem lies, right? That's where the accountability needs to come into place, and that's where the people of Canada are getting sick and tired of seeing money going out the door repeatedly over and over and over again in an ill-gotten manner. And, you know, to Mr. Massey's point, 72 sole source contracts, I mean, this was before the public service doubled, right? And we're still seeing that same sense of outsourcing, when if you've doubled the public service, have you not increased the capacity to be able to do some of this? We're still seeing those practices. You look at the consulting, the billions of dollars of consulting that happens regularly from this government. They spent money on to figure out, they hired a consultant to figure out how to do less consulting. Like, it's just, it's mind-blowing what's going on here. And this is just the beginning of it. So this is a good study for us to have to kind of dig into the beginning of the culture that has been allowed to permeate throughout 9 years, well, coming on 10 years soon of this government. So I think that's where the issue lies, and that's where the accountability piece needs to go. This can't just be a one-off. This is just the beginning, and I hope that members on that side would also agree that there needs to be a higher level of accountability for people who have been robbing the taxpayer blind, and that this government has allowed them to do so. So that's where I hope that this can go.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's been some interesting suggestions. Look, the committee's not going to tie me down if the minister deems to show himself here. There's a lot of things to ask him questions about. I hope he would come for the 2 hours. As the chair said, it's hard to get him out of here. Well, I hope he'll come for 2 or 3 hours so that we have the time to go through this. If he only comes for the hour, which the government seems to try and limit the exposure of their ministers to, then you know, 1 5-minute round is not going to allow anyone to ask, or me to ask, and you, other members to ask what we need to ask of them. And so on this one, I'm certainly open to the broader issue that MP Massey said about looking at the broader procurement issue, because obviously there's a systemic problem throughout the government when a public servant can sole source contracts to himself, when an ADM can sit in every board meeting of the Green Slush Fund where 82% of the time they vote their own personal interests money, according to the Auditor General, 82% of the time. That's not bad legal advice. That's a culture of conflict of interest, a culture of entitlement in the billion-dollar Green Slush Fund. And I'll have you know, that fund has spent $22 billion since it began, was established by Paul Martin, but it's the $2 billion in the last few years under this government that has been abused by the Liberal appointees. And nobody seems to care about the accountability of it in the government officials, or in the Liberal government. And we'll look at this thing and dismiss it. Well, it's just a little bit amount of money again. We heard that on the one about Futurepreneur. Well, it's only $35, $45 million. Oh, that's all. That's all. You know, we spend $15 million on potted plants for an Oscar party. So who cares about how $200,000 got abused and sent 72 times to an employee? MP Patzer was very clear. We won't go on. We have not proposed to prosecute other abuses of expenditures here, because they're being done well in dealing in ethics with this government. It's persistent, whether it's the procurement problems that led to a Rive scam, that led to Firth and his company, GC Strategies, being able to basically fill their pockets without doing any work. You know, it was a company of two that got hundreds of millions of dollars of government contract to then subcontract. And public servants were involved in that too. Lavish single malt scotch tastings being bought off, and no government control. No government control at the Green Slush Fund, no government control at Green Slush Fund, at GC Strategies. And let's not forget the most recent one. So here we have the special advisor, the next prime minister, or the next leader of the Liberal Party. He won't be the next prime minister unless the prime minister resigns because he's too afraid to call a carbon tax election. But the carbon tax Carney, who chairs Brookfield, is trying to get $10 billion from the federal government. You know what? Brookfield will get a 3% commission on that. 3% sure pays to be a connected Liberal and to be the real Minister of Finance who conveniently avoids conflict of interest by saying, I'm employed by the Liberal Party. I'm not employed by the government, but I get access to all the government information. So not being willing to look at this in any timely way on its own and saying relegate this procurement issue in the ISED department to just ask a couple questions of the minister, I think is typical of trying to dismiss and sweep the corruption under the carpet that we see so frequently with this Liberal government.
Your timing is perfect, Mr. Perkins. It is 10:15, and I understand from members that it was the will of the committee to adjourn at 10:15, so we'll take this up next meeting, and have a great day.